I'd like to thank the Secretary and the Congress of Scholars for the opportunity to present the Will Morrison Memorial Lecture. And I'd like to take a moment to remember Will. I had the honor of working with him for several years on the Congress of Scholars before he retired. And he was one of the most humble, dedicated, hardworking people you'd ever want to meet. Very dedicated to the scholarship and fellows of the Smithsonian. And when I was chair in 2012, I really missed his calming presence in the face of a shipwreck that hit Smithsonian, which some of you may recall. As Nooch mentioned, I'm a conservation biologist with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and National Zoo. And if you know me, you know that I am all over the map, literally. My focus is on developing and implementing science-based strategies for the restoration of endangered species and their ecosystems in the wild. I spend about 75% of my time on species restoration, and I spend the other 75% of my time leading the Smithsonian Myanmar Biodiversity Initiative. So today I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour, show you some examples from my work of how we at the Smithsonian are using science and how we can work together to solve conservation challenges on the ground. One of the greatest challenges we're facing currently is the global wave of human-driven biodiversity loss, which is happening at rates 100 to 1,000 times the normal background rate. During the past 500 years, we've lost 322 vertebrate species, with many more declining rapidly. We know a loss of a single species can cause cascading effects, impacting other species, ecosystem function, and ultimately impacting human well-being. Reversing the loss of species can help preserve other species and ecosystem functions, and important tools that we can use to help restore species include reintroduction, translocation, and rewilding. Today I'm going to give you an example of each. Smithsonian is a world leader in reintroductions, dating back to the 1900s. The first reintroduction of bison in the West was led by the first director of the National Zoo, William Hornaday. From building healthy populations in captivity to releasing and tracking animals in the wild, we are a global leader. The examples I want to show you today are work I've done in collaboration with my colleagues Peter Weingruber and Jared Staubach, as well as are the work of our postdoctoral fellows, Shifra Goldenberg, John McAvoy, Catherine Mertez, and Ching Zhao. We're going to start off in Chad with the reintroduction of the scimitar horned oryx. And this image is from our first release in 2016, after they've been extinct in the wild for over 30 years. So achieving this beautiful sight was a huge feat. It took well over a decade of planning from many international NGOs, research institutes, 2 governments, and many dedicated staff on the ground. This was a victory to celebrate, and for us, the fun is really just beginning, because now we get to figure out how to make this a success on the ground. But how do we know what success looks like? Meta-analysis of reintroductions in the literature shows that only 1/4 to 1/2 of reintroductions are successful in being that the species is still in the wild. Often results aren't even tracked or published. We need to track these results so that we can adapt future management to learn from our successes and failures, and to advance the science of reintroduction so that we can improve chances for building self-sustaining populations, both in our population and also to inform others as well. The best way we can do this, the most powerful tool we have, is satellite tracking. That allows us to track the individuals that are released, to check up on them, to intervene if needed, but also to learn about their biology and ecology, how they move, reproduce, behave, their social dynamics, whether or not they're surviving, and if not, why. When you're making this kind of time and effort investment in a reintroduction, it doesn't make sense not to go the extra step to have collars on as many of those individuals as possible, to learn so that we can learn as much as possible, but also give them the best chance for survival. I'm going to show you some examples of how we've used tracking to evaluate success and how it can help us solve challenges. In Chad, we have a tremendous opportunity. It is one of the most ambitious ungulate reintroductions in the world, with a goal of 300 to 500 animals released in a 5-year period. And every one of those oryx, if they're large enough, will be deployed with a satellite collar. So this is a total game changer in terms of what research and management questions we're able to answer. But how do we use tracking to test whether these naive animals are moving and adapting to being in a new environment in the wild? Based on what we know from ungulates in extremely dry environments, we expect their dispersal strategy to be a trade-off between expensive, risky and energetically expensive exploratory movements, and optimal resource patterns, eventually establishing home ranges, and we hope to see behavior that's adapted to the extreme environment in terms of their seasonal activities. In Chad, we also had the opportunity to test how pre-management conditions impact the success of the reintroduction. The first release group came from semi-free ranging conditions with at least 100 hectares of space and allowed to forage on natural forage, versus the second release group, which came from a very, very crowded pen situation and fed only by troughs. So looking at their movements after release, you can see our green, red, and yellow individuals. These are our free-range individuals. They moved quite a long way from the release site, versus our blue animals, which are our penned animals. They never really make a significant movement away from the release site, and they also are regularly visiting the supplemental feeding that's provided at the site. If we look at their patterns of dispersal, we see the ranging in the light gray here, ranging from 40 to 60 kilometers, versus the penned animals that are moving about 2 to 25 kilometers away. Looking at their home ranges, we see that it took the ranging oryx an average of 5 months to settle into a home range of approximately 1,500 square kilometers, versus the penned animals that took them anywhere from 5 to 15 months to establish home ranges. Some didn't establish home ranges, and on average, 500 kilometer square size. We also saw that the ranging oryx adapted their daily activities to the season. So if you look at this graph on the top, we have their daytime activities in light gray. That is, the ranging population. When they move into that red-lined period, that is the extremely dry period and hot period of the year. And you can see how their daytime activities pretty much disappear. But if we look down in the nighttime graph below, they jump way up. So we can see those ranging animals are adapting their daily activities. They're foraging at night so that they can save their water and save their heat and avoid the heat. While the penned animals showed no pattern really whatsoever in terms of daily activities and season. So you can see how tracking very quickly has shown us how the oryx are adapting, but also the importance of pre-release treatment. That can be very important to planning for future releases and selection of individuals. It also allows us to capture this video of the very first wild-born calf in Chad. I want to move now. We're going to zoom from Chad over to Sri Lanka to look at how tracking can be a great asset for adaptive management. Sri Lanka is a country the size of West Virginia, and it has 22 million people and 3,000 to 4,000 elephants. So they're very tolerant of elephants. However, in recent years, human deaths have been escalating, and now over 150 people are killed by elephants each year. So it's reached an intolerable level. And for decades, the Sri Lankan Wildlife Department, their solution was translocation, moving difficult elephants to protected areas and fencing them in. We worked with them to track some of those elephants, and this is our first elephant, Homie. He lived on a trash dump and really loved crops. And he was captured on the trash dump, put on a truck, and driven into Yala National Park. And he was not at all happy about that. He tried to go right back where he came from. And you can see he bumps up against this electric fence, but is not deterred and continues to move towards the fence until eventually he is breaking through. And he was discovered happily munching away back on his favorite trash dump within a week. Homie was moved once more to the same place, and once more he came back. Of the 16 bulls of the conflict animals that we tracked, that were being translocated into high voltage fencing, all escaped eventually. 4 of them went back where they came from. 12 continued to engage in conflict, while 6 were shot and killed later. So in 2011, the Sri Lankan Wildlife Department stopped using translocation as a technique for managing problem elephants. But what did we learn about elephant behavior? About a third of our elephants went back home. They were homers. Another third wandered. They covered huge spaces, never really settled down into what we would expect as a normal home range. And another third actually did settle down, and what we had really hoped to see happen, where they settle down into a home range and adapt to where they are. But why are we seeing this difference? These elephants are taken from the same situation and moved to the same situation. We believe it has to do with their temperament. And this is what we learned in Sri Lanka helped inform our work on a more recent project in Myanmar on the rewilding of working elephants. In Myanmar, there are 4,000 to 6,000 elephants working, and only 2,000 in the wild because of that, because they're regularly captured and tamed for work. But Myanmar is modernizing, so they've got more machinery, their forest quotas are way down, so elephants are losing their jobs. That's good news for the wild elephants. There's not going to be more wild elephant capture. However, you cannot have 4,000 elephants giving rides to ecotourists. We're working with the government to get some of them back into the wild. And this is a risky proposition, so we want to make sure we have the best elephants. Which ones have the best chance to succeed and adapt to being moved back in the wild? We know they're very social animals with different temperaments, so we worked with their mahouts to track them. We wanted to try to figure out who plays better with others. And you can see here a group of 4, each color is representing a different elephant. And we assume now that the green and the yellow elephants don't really like to be social versus our orange and red elephants who seem to like being social. This would tell us that these orange and red would likely be better candidates than the green and yellow. We also are doing mahout interviews, which is another way to learn about their personalities, whether they're aggressive, whether they're social. No one knows them better than the mahouts. Along with that, we've been tracking elephants and wild elephants in Myanmar, so we know a lot about their habitat and space use. We also have created deforestation, wildland, and habitat maps for the entire country. So we now have the information we need to help figure out who should go back and where they should go back, so we can advise the government where they should go. So those are 3 examples of how tracking can help us apply science to conservation challenges, and how we can use what we've learned from one project to expand and look at new questions. I want to switch gears now and talk about another critical component of conservation science, and that is people. And I want to illustrate that with my own personal tale of the Przewalski's horse and its return to its native land in China. The pea horse is a conservation success. It returned to the wild after 40 years extinct, with successful sites in Mongolia and one in Xinjiang, China, the northwest province of China. And this is where I've been working with the Forest Department. They've built a very successful breeding center for horses in the 1980s, and they began releasing animals into the Kalamai Nature Reserve in 2001. This was a fantastic initiative, but at the time they didn't know much about the ecology of the horses, and unfortunately it was a year with a very extreme winter, and these inexperienced horses, many didn't survive. The next year, they began to round them up for winter and feed them, and essentially at this point the project moves from a reintroduction to a semi-release. Fast forward 5 years later, they asked SCBI to help out based on our expertise in satellite tracking. I arrived ready, I was excited, I was ready to fix the situation. I just had to convince them to get those horses out with collars on so that we could see how they move year round and help inform how we can better manage them and move them to become self-sustaining. I soon realized it wasn't that simple. The Forest Department was interested in horse survival. That was their metric. They weren't particularly concerned about whether or not they were becoming wild. And if many horses are dying on the project, they could lose staff, they could lose funding, and eventually even be phased out. I decided we need to take a more measured approach and started collecting data for improving management. One of the big concerns was during winter, and that was when the local Kazakh herders would come down from the mountains with their thousands of livestock into the valley, into the reserve, bringing along competition for forage, risk of disease, and risk of inbreeding with their domestic horses. So we began interviewing the local herders, and we wanted to understand better about their socioeconomics and their use of the reserve. And what we discovered was that most of them relied completely on livestock. They didn't have other economic opportunities. They didn't have many educational opportunities. They hadn't heard anything about the project, but they were very interested and supportive. They wanted to be involved. We knew the answer to this challenge could not be, we have to get the people and wildlife out. We have to find something that's going to be in balance with people and wildlife in order for this to be a sustainable situation. We released horses with collars in 2007, and this had a big payoff because one of the groups disappeared almost immediately, and we got an emergency call from one of the rangers. We checked the data. this is what we saw. Turns out they hightailed it out of the reserve, about 100 kilometers to the west. And in these massive stretches of roadless desert, we never would have had a chance to find them if we hadn't had collars on. And this group remained in the valley. They still survive today and provide proof that they can survive on their own through the winter. From the tracking, we knew that their water was an important driver for their movement. And so we put infrared cameras at the water sources. We learned a lot about the horses' daily and seasonal activities. We continued to reach out to the local communities to get their feedback and update them on the program. And in about 5 years in, we interviewed them again. We found that most supported the project. However, 78% of the people that were sharing pasture with the horses felt that it was causing their pasture to decline, and they were staunchly against a year-round release for the horses. But we also found that they were still interested in being involved, and we began a participatory monitoring program, hiring family members, training them to monitor and collect data. Now they're more invested in the success of the project because they're receiving some financial benefits. Importantly, they were able to track the horses through winter when the Chinese and the Americans can't. And having them there in case of a severe winter or things going wrong, to be able to intervene, that gave project leaders more confidence in leaving the horses out. By 2014, the staff agreed to a full release for new groups, and so we now have 2 year-round populations. In the north, the red circle, that's our new population, and our escapees still in the west, in the valley. About half the horses are still around the enclosure area. However, this winter, for the first time, they will not be rounding them up, and they will feed them and provide food, but they won't force them into the enclosures. So this has been a big breakthrough, and one thing it taught me is that it was ultimately people and not the data that made a difference in moving this into a full release. And I think I learned a lesson that really applies to all the species and all the countries where I'm working, which is that conservation must be based on science, but ultimately can't be successful without the commitment and hard work of many people. And this diverse range of strengths and expertise we can be very effective at taking on challenges. So I want to take you one last trip back to Myanmar to talk about how we at the Smithsonian have been taking on a big conservation challenge, and that is in Myanmar. And if you have heard anything about it, you know that it's a global biodiversity hotspot with a lot of natural resources still intact, 60% of its forest cover. It has important ancient archaeological sites, rich cultural heritage. However, it is very poorly developed, and poor government makes it a very challenging place to work. However, Smithsonian has a long history there due to the attractiveness in terms of the research possibilities. We've been exploring the biology since the mid-90s. And in 2012, Peter Limegruber and I conceived the idea of the Smithsonian Myanmar Biodiversity Initiative in response to rapidly changing political situation. After decades of isolation, the country was opening up, and that meant a lot of extractive pressures coming in, but not a lot of capacity on the conservation side. We wanted to try to expand SI research and capacity building rapidly to support Myanmar's efforts to study and sustain their natural heritage. With Grand Challenges support, we were able to leverage that for foundational money and developing a country-based program with an office, a country coordinator, some centralized support, with the goal of working across units to leverage SI resources and expertise. We wanted to take a more holistic approach rather than just have a set of projects, to take a look at a landscape and seascape scale, to create critical data, land cover, threat, biodiversity baselines, and get it into the hands of people and decision makers, make it openly accessible along with tools for decision making. In collaboration with the Myanmar NGO, we've created new deforestation and threat layers, as well as detailed ecosystem map. And we have a new grant now from NASA to develop techniques for difficult to map forest types using drones. Smithsonian is a world leader for cataloging botanical and vertebrate diversity of Myanmar. With this initiative, we've been able to expand to new invertebrate taxa, including marine, freshwater invertebrates, and insects. We've continued the prolific work in herpetology with 9 new species discovered in the past 4 years and over 1,250 samples DNA barcoded in collaboration with the Global Genome Initiative. We're also partnering with many NGOs sharing data to model mammal distributions countrywide from 400 camera traps, and mapping bird diversity now throughout the country with support from scholarly studies. We're building baselines for fish biodiversity, including DNA barcoding, and using population genomics to improve fishery management. We're continuing our long-term studies of elephants and elk deer while taking on new emerging threats of wildlife trade and the elephant poaching crisis. Another exciting addition to combating emerging threats is the Smithsonian Global Health Program on wildlife health and conservation. This includes research and building Myanmar wildlife and public health officials' capacity. We're also building on our Myanmar partnerships and networks to help fill in the conservation gap during this critical time through hands-on customized training, workshops, open forums, on-the-job research experience, and mentoring. So over the past 5 years, by leveraging Smithsonian expertise and resources, Smithsonian Myanmar Biodiversity Initiative has increased our scientific output. We've really ramped up our capacity building, and based on this success, we've been able to land larger, longer-term funding. We've raised over $4.5 million for activities, been able to support expanded staff, tripled the number of postdocs and graduate students we support, added a program manager. So we've really become more effective through this initiative and collaborating at increasing and diffusing knowledge, but also in getting it into the hands of people who can use it through our partnerships and networks. And I just want to finish with our conservation commons, which I view as a way of taking the Myanmar model to the next level. At Smithsonian, we are the world's largest research and museum complex. We have the largest collection of biological knowledge and over 300 staff working on conservation-related topics. We have brand recognition around the world and incredible convening power. With Conservation Commons, we're dedicated to catalyzing natural and social science and humanities, research and outreach, breaking down the silos to reach across units, increasing our global conservation productivity through internal and external partnerships. We want to be a leader in research that's making a difference for nature and conservation. And I want to thank the Secretary for his support of large, visionary, and interdisciplinary research projects for addressing complex challenges while preserving our natural heritage. Because this is really what the Commons is all about. So I'd encourage anyone who is interested in learning more, please do get in touch with the core team. And here's the information on how to do that.